Okay, so I brought everybody up here for one thing so you can see. This is approximately an acre of vines in here where the sheep have been grazing. There's a little area outside of that where they can graze too. We haven't seen them graze over in there. They've done all their grazing inside the vines so far. And so you can see the difference between where they have been for a couple days and where they're going. And initially, if you first were to look at that, you might think, well, they haven't really done that much. But when I put sheep in here, the very first thing they're going to eat is bindweed. Is anybody familiar with bindweed? Okay, so that's their favorite thing, and it turns out that it's really nutritious. Most of the weeds are really nutritious, and so they take those and they convert those into fertility. Like a lot of folks, I got interested in vineyard grazing and quickly found out that you don't graze during the summer because sheep like to eat grapevines. But the biggest opportunity for having a grazing animal there is during the growing season of the vines. And so I had to figure out a way to do that. I started that by with a trial in Sonoma County where I used an offset system of electrified wires on either side of the fruiting zone and had some really interesting results from that. It was managed organic and biodynamic, and it was taken out of a 60-acre plot. So I had a huge control site that was managed conventionally. I'd managed that with sheep just during the non-growing season of the vines for 2 years, and then I set it up so I could graze during the growing season of the vines. When I grazed during the growing season of the vines, we had a 90% reduction in irrigation use, a 1,600-pound increase in yield over the average, and we had we had to do no mowing, no fertilizing, no suckering, no tipping, no hedging, yep. And so all of those things were eliminated. I estimated roughly a $500 per acre savings per year, and that was in 2010. I wrote an article on that. It was rejected by every viticulture magazine in this country, and it was put immediately into Australia, New Zealand Grape Grower Winemaker. The first commercial vineyard to adopt that system is in Australia, and they're going into their 8th year or so now. And every year I check in with them, and they said it just totally amazes them. They work basically conventional. They've quit all herbicide use and have also dramatically reduced their inputs in fertility. Based off of that idea, I thought, what if we were to design a system from the get-go so that we could graze sheep in it? Because basically what we're trying to do is modify a system that was not designed for that. In general, we are not designing vineyards. We're not designing anything in agriculture. We are adapting to the equipment that we use to manage it. And so in a sense, that's what we're doing here too. We didn't design this trellis system. I got the idea of this from Fritz, who was working with people using this. So we're taking a lot of concepts that are out there and just combining them. What I want to do right now, actually first, before we get into kind of the details of this, is talk about the principles of why we're doing what we're doing. And the basic principles are that you keep the soil covered throughout the year. And you can see that we're doing that. You reduce or ideally eliminate tillage. This has never been tilled. We ripped every row in here but 2 before planting, and 2, those were ripped at 2 feet, 2 we ripped to 3 feet. So far we're seeing no difference between any of those treatments. And because of that, the second planting that we did, we've not ripped that at all. We've not done any tillage in here since planting. We're going into our 5th year now. Another one is to manage for high diversity. And so we were looking at that in all species. You can see a lot of bird houses around here. This is now considered an eBird hotspot because of the diversity of birds we have in here. We're monitoring for insects with a entomologist this year and comparing that with other sites around here. We are doing a lot of soil biology monitoring as well as nutrient monitoring. We're doing plant monitoring as well. So we just did a baseline plant study in here before we started using season-long grazing. And we've got about, I think it's close to 40 species of plants in here right now. As we go forward, we're finding more and more natives are coming in to this system, which is pretty nice. Everything will go brown like this, and then we'll start seeing some native stuff coming up in the summer. that's adapted to this climate. And I think they must be mycorrhizal because they've got to be getting water some way. And a lot of them are going to be coming up in the middle of the rows. So we've got diversity, we've got reduce or eliminate tillage, keep the ground covered, and a big one is integrating livestock. A lot of the innovators in regenerative agriculture were actually in the Midwest, people like Gabe Brown. They saw the biggest benefits in what they were doing after increasing diversity and ground cover, all those things. They saw the biggest benefits occur once they started integrating animals. And I've worked in two places. I've worked in Arizona and California with vineyards that I've put in. And in Arizona, you have a monsoon season, so you're getting rain during the winter, so you have a growing season starting in about July. In California, we've got a rainy season during the winter into the spring, and so the majority of the growth of vegetation in a normal year, we had 5 inches this year, by the way, is going to occur after bud break. And so if you have to take livestock out before bud break, then you're going to miss that opportunity to have them in there. And I like to think of this as really what we're doing is we're managing energy, and we're managing the best source of energy, which is free, which is sunlight. And we're using that through plants and photosynthesis. Years ago, I was working a lot with ranches, and I ended up studying with Alan Savory for a while. He developed holistic management and some really unique innovations in grazing management, which are based off of mimicking nature. So all we're doing is we're looking at how large herds in natural environments, how they behave. And in general, they're going to be in high densities, because if anybody leaves the herd, they're going to get picked off by a predator. We're mimicking that without using predators. We have the tool of electric fence, for one thing. We also out on the rangeland, so we have about 3,000 sheep here right now. We use herders as well. So we're trying to mimic that behavior of a grazing animal staying tightly bunched and moving frequently. If you're in a large group, then you're going to be dunging and urinating, trampling your ground. You're going to have to move frequently in order to have something to eat. The animals get moved through here and the rest of the ranch fairly quickly. They don't stay in any one place very long, and they're usually in a fairly big group. We've learned right off the bat that an acre is too much for the 21 rams that we have, and so the next setup that we'll have will probably be somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 acre. We'll get better stock density, we'll get better utilization of the forage in here, because when you're in a tighter group with a limited amount of forage, you don't stand around looking at what your favorite thing is to eat. You just eat what's in front of you so that you have something to eat. That is the big driving force for why I was looking at how do we get animals into a vineyard. You hear people talking about how sheep are like lawnmowers. I think the reverse is actually true, is that we tried to design a lawnmower to be like a sheep. But if you think about a grazing animal, it's solar powered. It lives off of food that is produced by sunlight. It cycles those nutrients. All of these things are things that machines don't do. It's cycling nutrients. It's taking that feed inside of their systems, which is basically a big fermenting vat. So like there's these big fermenting vats working through your field. They're making those nutrients more available and putting them out on the ground. They're also self-replicating. Tractors don't do that. Lawnmowers don't do that. None of that stuff does. So I mean, we started out with 25 sheep, and we have 3,000 now. Magic. We had a big input last year, but it is pretty amazing how fast they can replicate. So the bottom line is that we're trying to mimic nature here. We're trying to mimic how a healthy natural ecosystem would function, and we have a lot to learn. We are not the experts in this by any means, and so one of the things is that there needs to be a lot more people doing this. There needs to be a lot more people using human creativity along with understanding of ecosystem processes to create systems like this, because the bottom line is we've destroyed a lot of our planet with our agriculture, and we need to reverse that. We need to start healing our agricultural lands and restoring biodiversity and soil health, cycling carbon back into the ground where it belongs. And so we have a really unique opportunity here to do that, and it's taking advantage of the way nature functions. So we're working from those principles. We actually have a page of about, I think it's about 17 principles that we're working on here. You can see that on our website. And it's one of those things that's constantly changing and being updated as we learn more and understand more about ecosystem processes and what we're dealing with here. That understanding that sheep need to be in during the growing season was kind of the first big insight for me in how we can start changing these systems. And as you heard, there's a lot of benefits that we saw from just a one-year transition into that. The thing that's really exciting to me about this is what is happening with the species diversity, the expansion of species diversity, but also the soil health. Organic matter in the soil, each 1% increase relates to about anywhere between, say, 18 and 26,000 gallons of water holding capacity. So every 1% increase in organic matter is going to allow you to basically increase the volume of the soil sponge to hold water. And so before we actually are even getting a crop off of this, we've increased our soil organic matter content by, we're probably getting close to 2% now. Last time we did a soil test was a year and a half ago, and we were at about 1.5. The way that we developed this site is a little bit different than most vineyards probably do, in that we had animals available. So I selected this site in part because of its location, north facing, up a little bit higher, close to our water source. It was close to headquarters too. This was also a site, historically there's 1,000 acres of grapevines on this ranch, part of Almaden years ago. And so when I asked Sally where I could put the vineyards, she said you can put it anywhere that there's already been farming done. And so this was actually one of the better sites that they planted, because the majority of the sites were down in the lower sections, which are still frosting, and that's why you still see remnants of 3 old frost ponds on the property here. So when they had frost events, which were probably really frequent, they had to put a lot of water out here. So I wanted a site out of range of frost. Well, so much for that. But I think we're definitely better off than being down below there, because we're getting frost down there, we would have been frozen pretty hard down below. And this is the first time we've had frost events here, so up here since I've been here. A couple specifics about what we're learning about sheep, or grazing animals in general. We're not the only people doing this. There's now a group in Germany that just contacted me. They have it's like a 3-year research project on how they can get sheep into vineyards during the growing season. And they are actually at the offset stage, which we were doing about 10 years ago. They're designing offsets to work for their systems. They are also working with a lot smaller sheep. One of the reasons I'm attracted to doing what we're doing here is that it allows you the opportunity to use basically any breed of sheep that's out there in this country. We're using hair sheep, we're using both Dorpers and Katahdins. That means they get wool like any sheep does, but they shed it during the spring. So we don't have to deal with shearing. And we also have a business of selling sheep for meat. And so having the hair breeds tend to be preferred for meat. The flavor is milder. A lot of the gaminess in lamb comes from the lanolin in the wool. If a sheep loses its wool, it's not going to have as much lanolin, and it's going to have a better flavor for most people. Things might change in 10 years. The wool market might be great, and we'd want to go into, say, a larger wool breed. We can do that because of the way this is set up. So we're not just designing it for a specific breed of sheep or a specific height of sheep. So it's a little bit broader outlook than that. When a grazing animal grazes a plant, the saliva comes in contact with that plant, and that tends to stimulate the plant and encourage regrowth. It also imparts disease and pest resistance to the plant. And if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, if a plant doesn't want to be grazed, there's all kinds of mechanisms that it can put in place so that it doesn't get grazed. There's thorns, there's toxins, there's woolly covering over the leaves. And so if a plant is allowing itself to be grazed, there's probably some type of benefit that's going to come from it, because that's the way nature works. It's this cooperative thing. And anybody who's grazed sheep in vineyards knows that sheep love grapevines. They love to eat the leaves off of those. And so the idea in this is setting up something that allows the sheep to be a sheep, that allows it to have contact with the plant, with the grapevine, so that we can impart those benefits to it. By doing that, it allows this really synergistic effect where the sheep is also doing work for us. But to the sheep, it's not work. It's eating, and it's eating something that it really enjoys. So we're going through here, we're able to do the suckering with the sheep, we're able to do the tipping, the hedging with the sheep, and then they're also eating the weeds. So some people have weed problems, we have a resource that we're taking advantage of. It's a plant that is photosynthesizing, it's pumping carbon into the soil, increasing the water holding capacity of the soil, and then it provides food for these animals that gets cycled through its digestive system and deposited back on the ground. So it's this great, really basic system of how nature works, and we're just taking advantage of that and trying to work with designs that favor that approach. Any questions at this point?
Do you think that the grazing has reduced your fungicide input?
So the question is, has our grazing reduced our fungicide inputs? I think we're a little too early in this to know. We are attempting this year to grow without the use of fungicides. I'll let you know how it goes.
How often are you putting, you mentioned 1 acre was too much for the rams, so when you get down to like 1/3 of an acre, how frequently are you putting them in each section?
So the question is, how frequently are we basically moving the sheep?
Yeah.
We're doing that partly by visual observation. So we're looking at the things that we think the sheep are interested in. We're not going to force them to eat something they don't want to eat. I would say that group of 21 will be here probably about no more than 5 days. They'll probably get moved on Monday. And when we put them in 1/3 of an acre, maybe they will be there for 2 days.
When will they come back?
They won't come back to this until there's been recovery in the plants. So it will be at least 45 days, because there are parasites there's a parasite cycle, and so you usually want to leave at least 35, ideally more like 45 days rest period before you come back in, so that you're not infecting the animals with a parasite. It may be 2 months or longer before we come back in here, depending on the regrowth. And at this point, all the regrowth is going to be where the drip emitters are.
Three questions. Did you start the system with additions of compost? Are you seeding in a cover crop? And is there any weeds that you're kind of manually removing?
Okay. That's the first one?
Yeah. The
Okay.
first one is compost application.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's a great question, and I skipped this, but I wanted to tell you how we did develop this site. I started on that. We selected the site, both sides. We had about 3 bushes on here and a lot of squirrel mounds. Should have been a big clue to me. So we did run a disc over to break down the squirrel mounds. We smoothed everything out, and we put down a light application of compost. I believe it was around 1 to 2 tons per acre over everything. And by the way, so the whole ranch is certified organic. That's just the baseline. And that's a lot of us in regenerative feel like the baseline is organic, and so you don't want to be poisoning anything. So all of our inputs have to be sort of allowable through OMRI, and we're certified through CCOF. Put down the application of compost and left it. We had our winter rains, which were pretty close to normal, so probably around 12 inches or so, our average. We don't have normal anymore. In managing livestock, we have a term called animal days per acre. Basically, it's how many animals it takes to graze an acre for 1 day. And so it's just looking at how much forage you have. So a low number of animal days per acre means you don't have much forage. A high number means you have a lot of forage. That first year we got about 7 animal days per acre. The second year, I didn't do anything else except added a cover crop. We had about the same amount of rain, and it increased our forage by 10 times. And that was reflected in that we had about 70 animal days per acre. So I think the reason for that is that we added both, that the compost had a little time to assimilate, and we added a cover crop. We're dramatically increasing the density of animals, which is increasing the dung and urine, and we pay a lot of attention to manure and things like compost. But the most potent nutrient source coming out of any mammal is the urine. And so having an animal directly in a vineyard like this, where you get that urine during the growing season, when it can be directly available, is a really powerful thing. So by doing that, we're just, by increasing the capacity of the landscape to support more animals, it's just this compounding effect. More animals, more manure, more urine, and you're just increasing the soil biology so that it can support greater amounts. And so it's this self-feeding thing driven by the sunlight. The next year, we had even higher numbers, and we had sheep in along with cattle. We ended up lambing out here. The forage was so high that when the sheep went into a new paddock, they disappeared. And all the lambs freaked out because they didn't see their moms. And they would work a maze until they opened things up a little bit. And then eventually they would take it down and go on to the next place. So that is the one thing that we have to be careful with in grazing vineyards, is actually too much fertility, too much vigor in the site. And so we use, out on the rangeland, and here too, we use what's called holistic planned grazing, where you really look at your animal density, the time that you're in places, that you have a good recovery period. And when I was doing contract grazing up in Sonoma County, what I would do is sit down with the vineyard manager and the winemaker and say, what are you trying to achieve throughout your vineyard here? And let's create a plan that works for that. And so, and people like to see that. People like to see that their issues are being addressed and that you're doing it with this biological tool. And so then when you go back the next year, you can say, this is what we did here, what are we seeing? This is what we did here, what are we seeing? How can we modify it to make it even better? Because working with nature is a constantly changing dynamic. And that's why we don't use something like a rotation, which is like, okay, we put 20 animals in here and we move them every 4 days. And that's just the set thing, because nature doesn't work like that. Animals in the wild don't work like that. They don't say, okay, there's 5,000 of us, let's stay in here for 2 days. It just doesn't work like that. So you need to pay attention to everything that's going on here with your plants, with your vines, with your soil cover. All of that comes into factor. So that is basically how we developed this site. And we continue using cover crops in here. I'm starting this year. I didn't mean to phase out of cover crops, but without the rain, we had a little rain in November. I think it germinated a bunch of that, and it died out before it ever even got out of the ground. So consequently, a lot of what we had in here were native plants. That section over there was covered in fiddleneck, which I've heard is livestock don't eat and it's toxic to them. Our sheep ate the heck out of it and loved it. And the hair sheep are a little bit different than other sheep in that they have a broader palate, almost a little bit more like a goat, which I never recommend putting goats in vineyards, because goats are almost purely browsers. They're looking up to eat. That's how we developed that site. We added a little more compost on this side, the newly developed side before we planted. We have added some gypsum as well. Partly we have high boron in our water, so having good calcium is important to mitigate the effect of the boron. Did I answer all of yours?
Yeah, and then is there any case where you have to do mechanical removal of weeds, or essentially livestock are kind of changing? And you have species rotation too, so it's not just one. You've got cattle in there too, so I imagine they're eating different things.
And we're not putting cattle in the vineyard.
Okay.
We had cattle before we planted.
Okay.
Cattle and sheep before we planted. But no, actually the sheep can bend the grape stakes in this side. We use the heavier duty grape stake on the other side, but cattle could make a real mess of this. So, and mainly just from rubbing. Even if they didn't eat a single grapevine, they would still annihilate the vineyard just rubbing on stuff. So, okay.
Early on, you mentioned a 90% reduction in irrigation from your primary grazing.
I just wanted to see if people were paying attention. In irrigation use, yeah, from.
Compared to what, and what were the yields results compared to? What was the comparison? 90% reduction
Compared to the control vineyard. The control vineyard was managed conventionally.
Oh, okay.
So it was
tillage, herbicides.
It was tillage, herbicides. Yep. So that was compared to that, and it was an 80% reduction though over dormant season grazing, which we'd done the previous 2 years.
Wow.
So that was, and if you're going to ask, or somebody's going to ask, how did that happen? I don't know for sure, but we had the ground covered.
Yep.
Actually, this is a great time to bring this up. There's a researcher named Kelsey Brewer at UC Davis who is studying dormant season grazing in vineyards. And he just put out there's a podcast that the vineyard team just put out, and he was giving his preliminary results. And I want to go over this because this is dormant season grazing. I think extended grazing during the growing season is like taking it on overdrive. But this is what they're seeing so far. 1.3 time increase in soil organic matter. We're a little bit higher than that. 1.3 times increase in soil nitrogen. 2 times more available nitrogen. 1.5 time more microbial biomass. More nutrient cycling. Better infiltration and porosity. Increase in stability of soil aggregates. So that's also going to increase your water holding capacity and the infiltration rate, which is really important. They did not see an increase or decrease in compaction, so compaction was about the same, unless it was a tilled vineyard. And he made a big point of saying, if you're tilling and introducing sheep, you're making a big mistake because you're going to get really increased compaction because the tillage is just fluffing up that soil and really making it prone to compaction. I mean, you're already driving all the carbon out of it by using tillage. So if you do that and then bring the sheep in, you're just gonna it's like you're making concrete. The thing that he said that they're really particularly interested in is the water dynamics, what it's happening to retaining water and allowing more water in. And so again, this is only dormant season grazing, but it increases the photosynthetic period of the plants that are in there, like the weeds and things, the cover crop. And it's also increasing the diversity of those plants, but not the numbers. It's reducing the numbers, but increasing diversity. The thing that's interesting, obviously to us, is what's going on in here. And at this point, I would like to introduce this young man, whose name is Tommy Finster. Tommy is just finishing up a graduate degree, and he was basically focused on almonds, comparing regeneratively grown almonds to conventionally grown. And he found out a bunch of fascinating stuff. But they're more profitable. Water. If you guys are interested, talk to him. But he just got accepted to Davis, and he is going to be studying the extended season grazing practices. So if there's anybody here who is at all interested in this and interested in setting up part of their vineyard for that, talk to Tommy, because we need more than one vineyard to look at. And he's working with UC Davis with Amelie Godin, and also with John Lundgren at NICES, who's been studying regenerative agriculture all over the country. So please talk to Tommy if you have any opportunities in that, because we need some more people to get in on this research project. But I just wanted to bring that up because people are starting to look at this, and we're finding a lot of really good stuff. And so this is the next level. This isn't the, as I mentioned, this isn't the only way to do this. And there's, I think you guys all have a link to an article, that I did, that talks about how I set up a vineyard with hot wires to do the same thing. So not every vineyard can be set up to do that, but there's a lot of them that can be. So.
How are you managing ground squirrel, gopher, moles, bobber? What's been the steps since establishment to now? What's been succeeding?
So I will say, first off, what I wish I had done is started before I did anything else. Like when I was first clearing that land and there's nothing around, it was basically bare ground before we got the cover crop up, I should have been out there every day trapping and shooting the squirrels that were there. What we have been doing is shooting, and we only use lead-free bullets here, which I think is going to be the standard all over the state, which is good because we like our raptors, we like our vultures and our condors and stuff. So we are trapping, shooting. We're using a thing called a burrow blocker, which is just a trailer with a sand hopper and a water tank. And we will go through and fill the holes that are in the vineyard with that. And we put a fish net with a big cable around it over those holes. When the squirrels come out, we whack them in the head. And because before we were standing there with a shovel and you might or you might not get the squirrel. But we've learned a few things about that. And actually that's kind of somewhat the last resort. Really, the shooting has started to pay off. And we have a retired guy who comes through here and patrols for squirrels. And so and having someone who has the time to do that and loves to do it has been a great way to keep the pressure on the squirrels. And so we are not just shooting and trapping in here, we're moving to the periphery too, because we realize that as soon as you open up all this real estate for them, that they're just gonna move back in. So you gotta go out beyond your range there, and then encourage as many predators as you can. We have a lot of raptors here, including bald eagles, which are apparently getting pretty good at hunting squirrels too. And we actually have one known golden eagle nest on the ranch. And the other thing is snakes. And we have a lot of snakes. When I planted this, I told the crew that if they saw any snakes to let me know, that I would take care of them. They thought that meant that I would kill them, but it meant that I was going to put them in a bucket, and when they were done, I was going to put them back out. They took 13 rattlesnakes out of this vineyard during planting, and we're just now starting to see them coming back in. We have names for some of our rattlesnakes up here because we know them by sight. And they know us too. Like they will see us and they'll like shake their tail a little bit, like I'm here. And so far, that's going pretty good. But we have a lot of gopher snakes in here. We have king snakes. We have red racers. And the thing that is still really heartbreaking is that I've seen 3 weasels here, and 2 of them have been in traps, in gopher traps. And so I really would like to figure out how we can get more weasels in here because they do a great job and they're fun to have around.
Do you ever recommend a squirrel recipe you guys use around here?
For bait?
No, I mean cooking them.
Cooking them.
I was just wondering what you do with all floured and fried.
Yeah, the cookbook's coming out and as soon as Carlos gets all the recipes worked out. And did anybody order squirrel for lunch?
Do you think you figured out the ratio of how many sheep you need to cover the acreage you have, or is it always kind of
So,
Repeat the question.
yeah, so the question is, have we figured out the ratio of sheep that we need in the vineyard? And because we're dealing with a pretty unique growing season here and non-growing season, it changes. So this time of year, we might have what would be the equivalent of, say, 40, maybe 50 animals per acre as a stock density. In the winter, it's going to be a minimum of 200. So when things are growing, and we would probably be able to graze, ideally we'd graze this twice in the winter, and it'll probably be grazed about 3 to 4 times during the growing season of the vines.
And you have your own sheep here, but then you actually bring more in on these when you need more of them? Or?
No, it's because we have right now we have over 3,000 sheep on the ranch, so that's more than we'd ever need in here. But it does give us a unique opportunity. For instance, if I wanted to put all the sheep in here and just get it done in a day, I potentially could, if I could convince the shepherds to do that. And that's a really nice kind of unfair advantage that we have, having basically 7,000 acres of rangeland.
I was going to say, how many acres do you need outside of your vineyard then to support?
So this is getting, yeah, so the question is, how many acres do you need outside your vineyard? And this is a really good question because a lot of people don't have sheep, they don't want sheep, and but they don't want to raise sheep, but they would like sheep in their vineyard. And so we are contract grazing for Carlisle Vineyard, which is up here. And this year, for the first time, we actually herded the animals down from Carlisle right back onto the ranch, which was a lot of fun. Usually at the start when we go up, they're up in the mountains pretty good there, and our sheep are too fat to make that trip. So they do better coming downhill. So there's a lot of options. For instance, when I was just doing the trial on testing out this idea with the offset wires, I was finding somebody that was selling hair sheep. I would buy a handful of sheep to put in the vineyard, and at the end of the growing season, they went in our freezer, and so it was a pretty easy thing to do. So you could potentially buy sheep at the start of the year from a sale barn, or a neighbor who's raising this type of sheep, and run them through just during the non-growing season, or even through the growing season if you're set up to do it, and then sell them at the end of the year back to the stockyard, or just put an ad in. And I know people that have bought them from a sale yard and sold them at the end of the season, basically for a little bit more than they bought them. So it didn't really cost them anything. It was kind of a free deal. And so and find friends. You might have friends or neighbors that have sheep and would love to have some place to put them because they don't have enough land for them. So there's all kinds of ways that can be worked out. But so the amount of land that you need for your sheep really depends a lot on where you are, what your rainfall is. In Santa Cruz areas, you can run a lot more sheep per acre than we can here and for a lot longer time. And so the best thing to do is talk to sheep producers in your area to get a better idea of that. But for this, so this section here that we call the front field, which was previously in grapevines, I think is around 270 acres. And we could easily run all the sheep that we need for the vineyard in this whole area and just bring them in here. But this is just one of the areas that gets grazed by the large flock, and so